Hey guys, Stealth here. In today's deck review I'm looking at an ANZAC Mechanized deck that was sent in by Murican gamers. Now when I saw the deck come in I was like, do the ANZAC even have enough units to fill a mechanized deck? So that's exactly what we're going to be looking at. Considering that Murican gamers only spent 59 out of 60 points, it could be that he either ran out of transports, ran out of infantry, or ran out of vehicles that he could put down somewhere else. But let's first see if the deck's viable at all. His objective for this deck is to capture and hold sectors in 10v10s. Now that's a very broad mission statement. It could mean that he wants to take sectors on the flanks. It could also mean that he wants to take sectors on the middle of the map. And these two profiles are completely different because in the middle of the map you're very heavily urbanized, so you got a lot of infantry that you're going to need there. On the outsides of the map you have a lot of open terrains, or at least usually, because I'm considering Asgard for this deck. And on those open terrains you got a lot of vehicles, not so much infantry that you need, but mostly vehicles and tanks. So taking and holding sectors is too broad of a profile, but I'm going to see if this deck might be able to do both, simply because you get a high availability bonus to your infantry. So to kick it off, always into logistics first. He has a ton of command units in here. Normally you're going to see decks which have 4 to 8 command vehicles. He has 16. He has 4 command infantry, 8 rover CPs, 4 command leopards, and then some logistics. This is definitely way too many units. What I'm going to do here is throw out the rover CP, because having a command infantry unit is nice. You can hide those much easier than you can hide a rover CP. A command leopard is nice if you have a zone which is heavily contested and where a normal CV, be it a vehicle or an infantry CV, might not survive. In those situations a command tank can sometimes survive, and at the same time I'm freeing up a slot to bring in more supplies, because one man Kadi is not going to be enough. So I'm also going to throw in a Chinook, and with these 3 units we have enough, or with these 3 cars we have enough units to supply everything that we need. Now in infantry, let's see. As expected, he's out of most high-end transports. Let's see, he has commandos in here. Commandos 90 with their very good anti-infantry weapon, the Ostire and the Mini-Me. Milan ATGN teams. Unfortunately you get pretty terrible Milan teams. I would prefer not to take these because their range is low, accuracy is low, armor penetration is decent, but it's usually not going to kill a tank in one shot. And that means that these guys are very likely to die. We might need to keep these guys in here, but for now I'm going to throw them out because I want to see if there are any better solutions for these guys. Then some SASR, very expensive infantry for the capacity that they have. They are great infantry killers with their AUG Para and their M60E3. They also can deal a fair punch towards armor and vehicles with 60% accuracy and 20% armor penetration. But they are just too expensive at 35 points. I find that a unit like this does not warrant this price tag. A 35 point unit is something like Spetsnaz, who are extremely skilled at killing infantry, and if you put SASR up against Spetsnaz or Legions, they're always going to get killed. Considering that the only method of transports for them, especially in this deck, is only a Chinook, makes them infantry that you can bring in for 60 points, which is a hell of a lot of points. But the rest of the infantry that we can get, diggers, yeah, it's not that much better. So in this situation I'm just going to leave them in, but with a footnote that they're only to be used in exceptional circumstances or as commandos, because they're the only flying unit that we have at this time. Next up, Diggers 90. And these Diggers have the capacity to do one-on-ones with most infantry and still come out on top, which is something that line infantry usually doesn't do very well. But these guys got the Ostire, they also got the Mini-Me, which is classed as a CQC weapon. don't really rely on them for their armor capacity or their anti-armor capacity, because this law has low range, low accuracy and low armor penetration. So don't get these for their law, but get them for their austere and their mini-me and just use them to fill up gaps. Now I wouldn't take 21 of them though, that's too many of them. Considering that you also got Commanders 90 and SASR in here, and Assault Pioneers if you're going into forests or towns. I'm going to switch these to Veterancy, and this will give me a few less units, but they're going to be more effective. Now, as mentioned, next up is the Assault Pioneers, and the Assault Pioneers are nice units. They're a 10-man napalm squad. Their range is low because they carry a flamethrower, but once that flamethrower starts to impact other infantry, and that is usually only 1 block away, don't expect them to fire across the street because their range is simply not good enough. But once they start doing that, you're going to very quickly panic other infantry, which would make it easier, for example, for Commanders 90, Diggers, or even SASR to come in and clear out whatever's left. Don't underestimate the transport that they come in, though, because this one carries a minigun. And with the minigun you can put down a lot of lead onto the target very quickly. They got a nice amount of rounds, and they can even fire at helicopters and do a lot of damage. Although their range against helicopters and ground targets is only 1050 meters. So they are not really that good at AA. It's more like a secondary function that they have. And then finally he has Red Eyes in here. I'm not sure why you would pick Red Eyes over RBS 70. Because I think that the RBS 70 are far superior to whatever Red Eye unit you can deploy. Yes, they cost you 10 points more, but their range is better, their accuracy is better, and their HE damage is better. The Red Eyes have an HE of 3, and that means that if you're facing, for example, a Hind helicopter, you have to fire and hit 4 missiles. Now that's a tall order, considering that you only have 6 missiles on one group of infantry, and they have an accuracy of 35%. He also has these at the hardened veterancy, so if you want to use Red Eyes at all, go with the veteran, because you need that extra accuracy. But in this case I'm going to throw these out and get them in an RBS 70. 8 of these should be enough, considering that we probably have one more slot for AA, and that we have a lot of support. I'm going to leave these points as is, because with what we have here we had a pretty well-rounded deck. I know that we don't have a lot of ATGMs, and the ATGMs or AT weaponry that we have is not that high. It's 18, 20 and 16, so it's not good. The MRAs could work here, but they only have 18 armor penetration as well. And it is just an all-round problem of the ANZACs, I found. They just don't have any very high-end armor penetration weapons on their infantry. Some other units can fix this later on, so let's have a look at those. Support-wise, he has 8 mortars. Considering that he has 60 infantry in here, you definitely need to have mortars in your deck. And he went with these at the trained veterancy, so that's good. Then some tracked repair FSAs. These are the anti-airplane variety, 60% accuracy, 3.5 kilometer range, and they fire off those missiles pretty quick. Usually you can get 2, even 3 missiles into a single plane, depending a little bit on how close it's going to get to the launcher. The other one, oh interesting, he went with 2 cards of FSAs instead of having 1 card of standard rapiers. The reason that I always take 1 card of each is because they each have their specific role. The FSA is geared towards airplanes. It has a good range against those, but a pretty terrible range against helicopters. The tracked rapier base version, if you will, has the quite opposite. It has good range against helicopters and bad range against airplanes, and it is not radar guided. That means that it loses 10% of accuracy, but it also makes it much harder to target because it cannot, or much harder to kill because it cannot be targeted by seed. So in this situation, considering that he has a high number of these, and I think too high a number, you don't need 8 of these. What I'm going to do is pick 5 hardened tracked rapiers and then 5 hardened FSAs. And then finally he has the M108. This is a terrible howitzer. It has very, very low range. It does carry a ton of shells. It has 80 shells on board the vehicle. Dispersion is 70 to 180. The rate of fire is decent at 5 rounds a minute, and their HE is 5. That's because they only fire 105mm rounds, whereas usual howitzers fire 155mm, which attributes to 7 HE damage. Now this means that the howitzers are almost as good as the mortars. Some countries even have, I believe, the 107mm mortar, which does 5 HE damage. So some mortars have higher caliber weapons than the M108. For now I'm going to delete it, because personally I don't want to invest my points into this card. Because you need to babysit these units, you need to make sure that they're close enough to the battlefield, and I don't like having high-priced artillery sitting so close. So I'm going to delete these, and maybe we can spend those points on something else. Tank-wise, yeah, all the usual suspects, I suppose you could say. 32 Leopard AS1+. Very, very solid tanks. 55 points will give you 16 armor penetration, a very high accuracy. Armament or armor is low though, at 8 and 3 on the side, so don't expect these things to stand up against very heavy armor, because that's just not their role. They're medium, yeah, I suppose you could call them medium tanks, because they're definitely not light tanks. And these medium tanks are supposed to flank and provide fire support to your infantry. But with these tanks combined with infantry, we still don't get a high armor penetration. It's only 16. And that means that we still need to look for something that can really deliver heavy punches towards heavy armor, because we just don't have that yet. Another unit that he has in here is the Walker Bulldog, also known as the M41A1. Now, these little tanks, they're decent, but that's all I'm going to say about them. I'm not going to give them the good rating, because while they have 8 armor penetration and 40% accuracy, they have an autonomy of 200. And considering that Asgard and Gjol and whatever 10v10 you're playing are usually very large maps, these things will need to get babysitted. You will need to make sure that they get fuel before they even reach the front line. On the other hand, once they reach the front line, you only need to kill 1 transport in order to break even with this unit, and if you kill a second transport, you made a 10-point profit. On the other hand, Leopard AS1+ or even Leopard AS1s could do pretty much the same thing, and you don't have to babysit them. So in this situation, I'm going to delete the M41A1s, because I simply won't be using them. Scorpion 90s I will be using, and these can also do the same thing as the M41A1. They're just a lot more accurate, and their autonomy is 750 kilometers versus only 200. Now you will be paying 3 times as much for that. Your armor penetration is 13, and rate of fire is 7. The main reason I use these is to provide fire support to an initial push of tanks or vehicles. So let's say you're doing an infantry offensive into a town, and you want to be able to deploy some tanks with those, which are not too bad to lose. In this situation you could bring the Scorpion 90, and with the Scorpion 90 you got a little bit of fire support for a reasonable price. Now, without sounding too much like a used car salesman, I'm going to move on to the Centurion Mark 5. These things I'm just going to delete right away. Terrible accuracy, terrible stabilizer, rate of fire is okay, armor is low, they got very, very bad off-road speed, so I would never use the Centurion Mark 5. Now I realize that has left me with 9 activation points to spend, but we're not at the end yet, so I can see those points maybe being spent in air, maybe a bit in infantry, or maybe another AA unit in support. Now, Reconnaissance. He has a very high number of vehicles here, and I suppose you could say too high. He has 1 card of Norforce. I'm going to switch this around to a Chinook, because with a Chinook I can deploy these anywhere on the battlefield, much more so than with an M113, because these things are just not fast enough. They can deploy anywhere with a Chinook, close to mountaintops, to make sure I got eyes from that mountaintop. Then he has an M113 MRV. It's It's a bit of a mix. It's a fire support vehicle mixed with a reconnaissance unit, and then this is what you get. It's just an M113 with a turret. That's really all it is. And they still, unfortunately, get that L23A1. It's a terrible gun because it has low range, low rate of fire, low stabilizer, only 5%, and low base accuracy. Their armor penetration is 10, HE power is only 2. The real only reason for these things to be in your deck is as a recon unit, because you definitely don't get them for the gun. Now, talking about recon units, there are plenty of others which can do the same thing better. And I'm thinking of the SLAV S with its exceptional optics, and the M113 LRV. These have good optics. The same goes for the MRV. And I'm thinking that this might stand for medium reconnaissance vehicle and this for light reconnaissance vehicle based on the armament and armor that they carry. So this one has a bit more armor, this one has less armor but it's cheaper, and it only carries 2 machine guns instead of a main gun. Personally, I would just ditch the M113, the M113 MRV, because I just don't like that main gun. Besides, we won't be needing this many reconnaissance vehicles, so I'm going to upvet these and delete the 16 group. Now, a unit that I was missing in here is the SLAV-25, and the SLAV-25 is a recon vehicle that I do really like. Probably even more so, and well enough that I'm going to delete this LRV later on to get myself another card of these, because with 50% accuracy, 2 armor penetration, they can be fast reconnaissance units for your main force, and they can be used as fire support units as well. So you would, for example, have a couple of these with their Bushmaster autocannon to destroy enemy infantry. Sorry, I had to take a sip of water there. You can use the SLAV-25 with their Bushmaster for anti-infantry, and then if you have the Scorpion 90 with you, you can use these for heavier armor penetration. Because these guys got 13 versus the only 2 armor penetration on the SLAV-25. Now in this case we get the same amount, they're just slightly more expensive, but 15 points is not that much. So definitely not using the LRVs but the SLAV-25s. And considering I got so many points to spend, I'm just going to get another one of those. Then in vehicles, another card of SLAV-25s, but these are the TOW 2s. And unfortunately this is classed as a prototype. That is really very unfortunate, because these are some of the few vehicles that actually carry high armor penetration weaponry, like the TOW 2. So the problem that we still have is high-end armor penetration, and I know that the ANZAC have this problem with their vehicles, their tanks and their infantry, and they don't even get any good any good helicopters that can do it. The only real unit that can do it later on is in the air tab, and that's the Kehu. So we definitely need to make room, if it's not already in, for that unit to be here. Anyway, SLAV-25 TOW 2. Pretty much all you would expect from an SLAV-25. It's mobile, it's fast, it has good autonomy, it has a bit of armor, and as far as I'm concerned it carries way too few TOWs, because it only carries 4 of these missiles. Now they have a very high accuracy, but considering that you are more likely to miss 1 or 2 of these due to the wonky game mechanics of them, where they suddenly, let's say they're coming at the vehicle and suddenly they hop over it, that still happens. So you're really only likely to get 2 or 3 hits out of these. And for that reason, I'm going to switch these from their veterancy to hardened, to make sure you get a bit more of those. More ATGM carriers are here in the form of the Milan, the M113 Milan to be exact. This one carries more missiles, but again with a terrible accuracy and a low armor penetration. It's not low in the sense that 17 armor penetration cannot defeat most armors, but it's low in the sense that most anti-tank vehicles have something in the range of 20 to 25 armor penetration and a lot better accuracy. So personally, I don't really like these things, and I think we're going to have to use this deck as a hit and run situation. So again, I'm gonna delete the Milans and see what other units we can bring in here. Ferret ANZACs. Wow. Definitely not my weapon of choice. They are fast, I'll give them that. They got a good off-road speed of 95. They carry the slightest amount of armor, one every side. Autonomy is good, but the ferret, yeah, what shall I say about it? The machine gun is pretty low accuracy. The ANZAC ATGM actually has higher armor penetration than the Milan, and it has the same accuracy. So considering that, we might need to keep these things in. And they have a 35% accuracy with a veterancy bonus of 24%. So 10% of 35 is 3.5. So you're going to be looking at 41-42% accuracy. They only carry 6 of these missiles, and that means babysitting. And babysitting is something I prefer not to do for 20-point vehicles. The only real unit that warrants that is super heavies and tanks. So again, deleting the ferrets. Rover Milans are in here. Again, it's the same terrible Milan, so I'm going to delete that as well. I know I'm just deleting most units that he has in here, but it's just because I feel I won't be using them at all if I were to use this deck. What I would be using, in the highest possible numbers, is the Vickers Mark 11. And that's because ever since this unit got introduced in DLC 3, I've just completely fallen in love with these things. High range, or at least a good range that you would expect on a tank. Great accuracy, even on the move, and these things are meant to be on the move. You can deliver 17 armor penetration with a rate of fire of 8. They got a bit of armor, which is also quite unusual for a wheeled vehicle. And their off-road speed is 100 kph. These things, and you can get 36 of them if you want to. I think 26 would be enough. So I'm just going to group these together in the deck builder. With these, you have somewhat of a very mobile glass cannon tank. Very mobile, as I mentioned, off-road, but glass cannon, only 2 armor. They will deliver quite a punch with their 17 armor penetration, but it is still not going to be enough to penetrate super heavies from the front. And that is something that the ANZACs just don't do. They seem to need to flank the enemy in order to do that, or bring in K-Hoos to make sure that happens. Helicopter-wise, unfortunately we only get the Bushranger in this section. And he went with 2 cards of these, which is, yeah, it's really the only thing you can do here. The the Bushranger has twin miniguns, good against infantry. And they got these special rocket pods firing heat munitions, which means that they're always going to do some damage. And that means that even with a super heavy, so let's say you're facing a T-72BU, if you spam enough of these units, and I found that 2 to 4 do the job reasonably well, you're going to kill that super heavy. But it does cost you 4 times 45 points, so you're going to be spending 180 points yourself in order to kill that super heavy. The problem is further that a super heavy usually does not come alone. It's usually escorted by other tanks, it's usually escorted by AA. So let's say you are facing off against T-72BU, usually, at least if you're playing against me, a Tunguska will not be far behind. And that means that these things are going to drop like flies because they only got 4 strength, not exactly a lot of speed to get out of there if they spot the Tunguska. But since they're the real only helicopters we can bring in here, I'm going to keep them in. I'm just going to upvet this card from 16 to 10 to make sure we got a little bit more accuracy there. Now, finally the air tab. He went with a Strike Master, which has a couple of napalm bombs, 0 ECM, very slow speed. Would make this thing sometimes a one-way plane. It is just gonna go in, deliver its bombs, and probably get shot down if it even gets to its target. So with that in mind, make sure that if you want to use these things, the road is more or less clear. And for that we're going to need a seed plane, which is unfortunately not an available option here. So if you want to use these things, keep in mind that they are probably going to be throwaway planes. Now here is the tank sniper. this is a plane that we're going to be using a lot in this deck in order to defeat heavy armor. The Kehu is not fast, only 600 kph, but it does carry a reasonable amount of ECM, 30%, and it carries these two Fire and Forget Mavericks. You can see them here mounted below the wings. And with these Mavericks you can do 30 armor penetration with a 60% accuracy. Now usually that translates into doing one hit onto a tank, because the other missile will usually miss. So you won't be able to kill a super heavy with one of these. You might need to fly in with two planes at the same time. Unfortunately, I might add, because the Kehu is somewhat likely to get shot down. If someone sees these things coming, they're going, okay, that plane is going for one of my tanks, I need to shoot it down. And that is something that they will do. They don't have a high amount of ECM, they don't have a very good speed, so they are very likely to get hit and probably go down to enemy fire. Next unit that he has is the FA-18A Hornet. Good all-round bomber with 4 500 kg bombs, a bit of AA capacity, 4 AIM-9Ls, good speed, decent ECM, only 30%. But the one unit that I was expecting to see right here in the first slot is the F-111C. The Americans call it the Aardvark, the ANZAC call it the F-111C by its official designation. This one is a mandatory unit because it carries 8 1000 kg bombs, and it's basically a delete button, or at least that's how the community usually refers to it. These things, if they drop 8 of their bombs, are going to obliterate infantry, even if it's inside building blocks. They're going to utterly devastate vehicles, if not destroy them outright, and they're going to do quite a bit of damage to tanks. Although of course it's only an HE power damage that they're delivering, not armor penetration. So you need to have this in your deck, whatever you do. Now what we don't have yet is a Air Superiority Fighter, and unfortunately this is the only type of Air Superiority Fighter that's in this deck. It's a very old 1969 Mirage fighter, which has the magic missile, and that one only has 2 Fire and Forget missiles with pretty low accuracy, low range against airplanes, low HE power, and it carries, lo and behold, one long-ish range air-to-air missile, 4900 meters, bad accuracy, low amount of HE power. So don't really expect these things to do a lot of damage. So I'm not going to go with an ASF here. Considering you're in a 10v10, I would consider that other people, hopefully, are going to cover you with their air superiority fighters. Or if you can get to play with a buddy, make sure he has some high-end air superiority fighters. I don't care if it's a Eurofighter, if it's a Rafale, if it's a Block 52. You need something high-end to make sure that your air force is not going to get threatened by enemy aircraft. Now I'm considering for my last 5 points in this section to bring in the Skyhawk, because as mentioned we don't have a lot of high-end armor penetration units in this deck, and with the Skyhawk you can definitely up that a little bit. I would take 3 of these at Veteran, because with that you're going to boost the accuracy to a little over 50%. The missiles that they carry are fortunately also Fire and Forgets, so they don't have to stay in range that long, and they are exactly the same plane. The armament is just a bit different, and they don't have any ECM. So these things are very likely to get hit and be out of action for a while. But with 26 armor penetration, they are some of the highest AP units that we have. They need to be in here, just for the reason that we don't have any other armor penetration units. So that leaves me with 3 points to spend here. Let's see. I don't need any more tanks. 53 units should be plenty. Vehicles, as mentioned, there are not really any other vehicles that I would like here. I considered the SLAV-25 FSV, but we already have 20 SLAV-25s here, which cost exactly the same, but have good optics, so it wouldn't make sense to bring in SLAV-25s. Recoilless rifles are things that I just don't use if I can prevent it. Same for the FSV version of the M113 or the Milans. I just won't be using these. So I think that what the ANZAC needs a little bit more of is infantry. We got 3 more points we can spend here, or I can get another support unit, like another AA unit, and make sure I have a bit more capacity there. Now, aircraft or helicopters, which are we going to be targeting? It really depends on the decks you're facing. If you're facing off against an airborne deck, you can expect either. You can expect a lot of helicopters and or a lot of airplanes. If you're facing off against normal decks, facing off against airplanes is more likely than helicopters. And with that in mind, I'm going to get another card of Rapier FSAs. Gives me 1 more point. Let's go back into infantry. And yeah, what to do? Let's just go with another card of Commandos 90. And since it doesn't really matter which transport you take over here, this one's armed with a twin M1919, which has decent accuracy of 25%. This one has less accuracy but a higher suppression rate, because it fires 12.7mm rounds instead of 7.62. So I definitely want to keep one of them in those transports, but I'm going to move them to the end of the slot here to keep them grouped up. And with this, I think we have a deck that you can work with. It's not the best, but it is somewhat viable. I personally wouldn't be using this, but if you feel like you really like the ANZAC, please go ahead and use it and let me know how it performs. The one category that I haven't discussed yet is Naval. Let's quickly go over that. He has more diggers. Now we got 70 units in infantry, so if you go through those all, you're in trouble anyway. But we can use the diggers as a landing force, so let's keep them in here. He has 1 command unit. Might be useful, but you're going to heavily rely on friendly units in order to capture or in order to clear out the seas. Rapier FSAs we have enough of. STRB 90Hs are nice units, but they need to be with a supply ship. If you cannot get one of those in, you might as well not go into the water anyway, because these things, after they run out of Hellfires, are really only good against infantry. They have a decent range, 1225, but they're pretty situational. So what I'm going to do here is go for the air or anti-ship air options. So the usual suspects here: CF-18A is UW, the FA-18E Super Hornet, and the F-111G with 4 harpoon missiles. With these aircraft, I can put enough harpoons on target to effectively overwhelm the sea whiz of pretty much any lone ship and even some grouped ships. So with that, I believe that we have a decent deck for the situation. Now, as mentioned, I won't be playing it, but if you want to play it, the deck code's in the description down below. And if you have a great replay with this ANZAC Mechanized deck, let me know, send it in. The link to sending it in is also in the description. Hope you enjoyed watching this this deck review. If you did, please hit like. If you want to see more, subscribe to my channel, and I'll be seeing you next video.